Welcome to this SCORE webinar provided through SCORE Mentors Green Bay. Welcome everybody to this SCORE webinar. This is the fourth in the series from SCORE Green Bay on ownership design. And today we are going to be talking about DAOs, but before I get ahead of myself, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Laure Haak. I am both a SCORE mentor as well as a small business owner. And as I was setting up my own business, a lot of the questions I had were, well, do I set up an LLC? When do I set up a co-op? What is a DAO anyway? And so a lot of this series was really answer questions I had about how you set up a corporate structure. But also I find as a SCORE mentor, many people have come to me and said, I really want to set up a co-op, but I don't know how. I really want to set up a DAO, but I'm not really quite sure what all that entails. And so I'm really pleased to welcome our speakers today to talk about these. But before I introduce the speakers, again, I wanted to mention that we are recording this webinar and we will be making available the entire recording through YouTube. So if you follow us at SCORE Mentors Green Bay, you will get an update as to when those are posted, and we'll probably also send out a note to everyone in constant contact, with the note when those get posted. Again, please follow at SCORE Mentors Green Bay, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, to get an update on when those are posted. So as I mentioned, this is the fourth in a series. And so today we're doing DAO hybrids. As I mentioned, we've talked about ownership design. We've just posted the videos for that, employee ownership and cooperative ownership. This one will actually talk, this webinar today will talk a bit about co-ops and DAOs and how you can use kind of the structures of both to set up a really strong corporate structure for your organization. So our goals today, explain how DAOs work, to highlight small business DAOs. So I thank Shady, Damaty, and John Powler and Brandon Dubé, who have all kind of are utilizing components of DAOs in their businesses, whether it's the technical component and or kind of the social and legal structures around DAOs to set up their business. We're going to introduce you to the SCORE Mentors program. And also, as I mentioned, create resources so that when you have questions about, oh, maybe I want to set up a DAO, you can come back to this video and get the resources from the video to learn how to do this. So I also want to thank SCORE Green Bay for their support of this concept for the Small Business Administration, which supports SCORE, and also Mighty Red Barn, which is a co-sponsor of this event and helping to pay for the video component of it. So with no further ado, I'm going to tell you a bit about what SCORE is. This should be a very small part of this webinar, but I do want you to understand what SCORE is. So SCORE has been around since the 60s. We are a resource partner of the U.S. Small Business Administration. We are a nonprofit organization whose mission is to help aspiring and existing businesses succeed. So we provide everything from free one-on-one video mentoring, in-person mentoring, and also phone mentoring. We provide live, online, and in-person workshops. And we also have an online library of articles, blogs, checklists, business plans, you name it, it's there. And the really wonderful thing about all of this is it's free. If you have a question about how to start up a business, how to manage your business, you can come to SCORE, and people like myself who have a lot of experience in business can help you out. So thanks to our over 13,000 volunteers, last year we helped many thousands of businesses get started. Those businesses have created hundreds of thousands of jobs, and we have clients in over 1,500 communities around the United States. SCORE has a really interesting chapter structure, so each state has multiple chapters and we can coordinate activities, but also because we work where we live, we understand who the partner organizations are for SCORE and can really holistically help small businesses get started. So long and short, you don't have to go it alone. Come to SCORE. We're here for the life cycle of your business, everything from starting up setting up accounting, business plans, thinking about how you manage HR. We can also help you sell your business and think about, we don't do the M&A, but we can help you think about how do I transition my business. And actually one of the earlier SCORE webinars we did on employee ownership highlighted 2 companies that transitioned from family ownership to employee ownership and talked about how that works as well. There's a factoid on here. Small business clients who receive over 3 hours of mentoring do report more success in their business, success measured as higher revenues and increased business growth. So mentoring is helpful. Again, it's also free, can't hurt, just give us a call. If you're interested in finding a SCORE mentor, you can go to this link on the bottom of the page, www.score.org, and find a mentor. You can look for a mentor based on where you are, or also by the skill set of the mentor. Now, of course, for SCORE to succeed, we also have to have mentors. So we really encourage you, if you like this idea of providing back into your community and think you have some relevant business experience, please think about joining SCORE as a mentor. There is a strong program to help train you to be a mentor and ongoing services for our mentors. If you're passionate about entrepreneurship, think about joining us. It's most of what I do is online, so there's it's a wonderful way to kind of augment your week talking to some really excited small business people. To think about or plan on being a mentor, please again go to www.score.org and click on the button that says join our team. With that, I'm going to turn this over to the panelists. We have 4 people on the call today who are all awesome. We have Jacqueline Radebaugh, who is a senior associate attorney at Jason Wiener PC, who is an expert on DAO hybrid legal structures. I am so pleased to have you here, Jacqueline. Thank you. We have Brandon Dubé, who's a co-founder of Crowdwork DC. He has worked in a number of different legal structures. Crowdwork itself is a limited co-op association and LCA. And he's also really thought hard about, how would we implement DAO corporate structures or DAO operational structures to enable the work of our organizations. So Brandon, thank you so much for joining us today. We have John Paller, who is the founder of Opolis and has done many, many things in the area of DAOs on the technical and organizational side. He's going to tell us more about what Opolis is and how it can enable small business owners and individual solopreneurs like myself to obtain both health insurance, life insurance, as well as a payroll stub, which is really important if you're trying to get, a loan. So thank you, John, for joining us today. I'm really looking forward for you to be able to share what Opolis does. And rounding up the group will be Shady Damaty, who is doing a lot of work in open science. And what I really love, he and I are both neuroscientists. So when we talk, it's just a lot of fun. What he is trying to do is really ensure that as people are doing their research, doing their science, that it is easier, more seamless to both share the work, but also get credit for the work and contributions that you do. And so Shady is going to talk about the DAO technical components that he's implemented to enable those kinds of sharing and contribution acknowledgements, but also some of his thoughts about how he set up his business and how that business structure interacts with the work that the organization is doing. So I'm going to stop talking. Jacqueline, over to you.
Well, thank you, Laure. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for talking it up. I am, as an attorney, I will start with a disclaimer that this is, presented for informational purpose only. You should always talk with an attorney for specific information. Neither the presentation or myself are presenting it as your attorney, so don't take it as an advice. It is not. Also, might touch on some Colorado specific stuff because some of my colleagues are in Colorado, some of my team's clients are in Colorado. I am not a licensed attorney in Colorado. I'm licensed in Texas and Ohio, where I'm currently based. That's so so we're all clear on the same page. Laure, I'll tell you, just go ahead. Thank you. So I'll talk a little bit about cooperatives, and I know you had a previous presentation about that. So I got pulled into this work, super exciting. And initially I was kind of hesitant by John Pollard and their team. And then through the work that EF Machinic had been doing with them, they're running a DAO, starting this amazing project for a few years, working that up. We think this could be a cooperative. Can we do this? And at the time, there wasn't legal entities for that were DAO specific, and today there are, and I'll just kind of briefly touch on that. But I wanted to show you, and I think I missed the slide I wanted, so I'll send that to you, Laurie. But the same way that cooperatives can mean several things, DAO can also mean several things. So I hope that the other folks, you can say on that one, I'll use that, but can mean several different aspects depending on who you're talking with. So for cooperatives, they can be statutory business entities. So they can be, that's when we're talking about cooperative corporation, limited cooperative association. They are, and the statute has created that as a legal business entity. That can be also a set of practice and values, and that will be in a second, the next slide. And those principles can be, there are several different types, but the Rochdale principles have been adopted by most of the cooperatives as baseline principles. They agree that if you're a cooperative, you're likely subscribing to these principles. And as a statutory business entities, as I mentioned, outside of the big picture cooperative corporation and the limited cooperative association, you can still have very kind of industry specific agricultural cooperatives and other sectors that have lobbied enough to have their specific regulation that takes in consideration some of their specific needs. And the reason why I'm bringing up the 7 cooperative principles is because I think DAOs can also be at this point, and not when I started this work a year ago, but then with Opolis a couple of years ago, they were not statutory business entities. Nowadays, they can be a Wyoming DAO LLC. We can call that a statutory entity for a DAO. Tennessee has adopted a similar entity as well. Vermont, you can say that. Thank you. Vermont have adopted also kind of a little bit more DAO specific, which really are LLCs with features like they recognize smart contract features, for instance. So we can say that they reflect each other in that sense, and that's where it starts overlapping with the basic principles that hopefully we'll hear from the other folks on the decentralized, the autonomous aspect, trustlessness, the permissionless. I will not try to repeat that. The members' economic participation. So how do they overlap? Laura, you can go ahead, please. There are some designs and features that we can kind of see operating in real life. So DAOs, operating on Discord or whatever other means, electronic and online means that they adopt. They operate for the most part, and those I have worked with for the benefit of their members. And again, bringing up the cooperative, it's kind of similar when you hear, you don't hear the label and you hear that's one member, they have a vote. It's this operation, this collaboration is carried for the benefit of its members. Those start to sound like cooperatives, and those are cooperative features for the legal entity type. Those are also features for the cooperative that are in the regulation. For DAOs, that's not the case. So not all DAOs as a legal entity, to the extent that we can call it a legal entity, and we can touch about that on that later, to the extent that that is one, the law hasn't regulated what they are, what that means. And I know John hopefully will talk about the broader approach to decentralized organizations that are their own entity that kind of just adopt principles and have language specific. But as of today, there isn't a good regulation that does that. So the cooperative the cooperative statute, because it provides so much more clarity, has worked for the groups, again, that are operating for the benefit of their members. Laurie, Can you skip, please? Yes. So those are some of the features that we look at, member participation, as I mentioned. So that means governance, that means financial rewards and distribution. The management is typically managed and as in their daily operations and how and decision-making process through the members as well, through proposals. They seek transparency, and some of the cooperative statutes actually support that, the DAOs that adopt that as a legal entity type and seeking transparency, and maybe too much to the extent that a lot of DAO members want to retain their anonymity, and that, Colorado, for instance, requires name and addresses of the members to be kept by the entity. And really all the LCA regulation typically does. So it's not a good or bad feature from Colorado law. It is just what we operate in. So I wanted to kind of place the DAO cooperatives in kind of this continuum of cooperative development, because we have had these more traditional cooperatives that, like milk and purchasing cooperatives, agricultural cooperatives. There's this whole set of cooperatives that came before with worker cooperatives, where you start seeing more the benefit of the workers, whether they're employees or not, but for the benefit of their members. And then the past 10 years, we started seeing a lot of multi-stakeholders. So we have the workers, and then we have consumers. Think about a grocery store that's community and worker owned. And then we're seeing all those interests at the table being part of the same entity, what means that sometimes their interests may be opposite, but they're trying to work together. Then we're seeing platform cooperatives with Stocksy and other groups that operate online. Discos, for instance, as well, will fit them into platform cooperatives. They are cooperatives that may look like any other, but they operate using the internet as part of how they do business. And then the DAO cooperatives that really are a group of people trying to accomplish a good. They adopt a set of values that we identify with Web3 or blockchain principles or values generally, and then that can fit into the cooperative spectrum in that they are made or created for the benefit of their members. And I'm getting to the end. When we're working with a DAO group, next slide, please. We kind of talk them through in that want to adopt the limited cooperative association or a cooperative legal entity type for their business. And, the interest here is just protecting from risk and liability, right? If you don't form a legal entity for your DAO, you're likely going to be considered by the courts, and operationally as a general partnership. Everybody that's engaged with it is personally liable. We have recent cases where that has been punished. So we want to make sure that the members can participate without personal liability and adopting a legal entity type, be it an LLC or a cooperative model, that what's protecting each one of the members from personal liability for the risks or liabilities of the group operating together. So we look at what are the member requirements for participation or to receive distribution and benefits. How do they interact and make decisions together? Will they have, how big are they gonna be? Because if that's a worker cooperative type and it's a small team, maybe it's a collective board where everybody is considered part of the board. So you really operate as a collective versus having to put a board in place, which the regulation usually require. And now you're asking yourselves about whether you're decentralized and not, and how much decentralization there is. So those are some of the features or the design questions that we ask while working with those groups, and identified some of the challenges that we have is tracking that relationship, the interaction with folks being fully remote, people operating online and having less of the individual trust. What does that mean for the operation of and success of this group? but also the inability sometimes or a lack of interest in sharing personal information. And how does that impact the choice of a legal entity type as well, because of requirement compliance, right, with KYC and just kind of state law, like those that require name and address to be kept. So we're doing a lot of advocacy around that with public agencies to know, like, is this an actual requirement, or is this something that would be nice to have? Could we not have it until there's a need to have it? And Colorado agencies have been open to using maybe a third-party identity, third-party app or third-party service provider that can confirm identity, but keep that private from the other members or from the entity up to the time where there is an actual action that requires that information to be shared. So providing some extra protection. So when you get the slides, you're going to see a little bit more information or how we frame the types of DAOs based on what I have seen. So, like, are they data marketing or worker type of DAOs? And if you're looking into that, to adopt an entity type like a cooperative one, this is helpful, and that's the next slide. And to Laure, to show kind of like, well, this is maybe how I identify my DAO there, and this is kind of maybe the equivalent in cooperative language, because there are not a lot of attorneys doing this work. So if you can help do some of that translation, that helps you and helps the attorney to work with you on that work as well. Not a requirement, but it's, if you name and put some labels, sometimes it helps make it work. So that's all I have for now. I don't know if I took too much time or not, but hopefully the legal is not what's on your way of making this work. Legal should really just be one more feature that you're looking at when you're trying to be successful.
I can talk a little bit about what organization I'm here representing today, as well as a little bit about my background. So Brandon Dubé, I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area, but currently living in Richmond, Virginia. I'm part of an organization called Crowdwork, which is a DC-based limited cooperative association based in DC, and we provide technical assistance and professional services to government and underserved communities in the Washington metro area. Some of the projects we've done have been focused on providing entrepreneurship training to underserved communities who may not have access to traditional forms of employment. We've also offered digital services to different customers nationally and internationally, but we really kind of came together over the last few years, I want to say like right at the first few months of the pandemic. We incorporated in Washington, D.C. using the LCA statute there. And it's been an interesting ride over the past few years. And we're looking at the future and kind of how to better incorporate with the direction that DAOs are going. And I'm really hopeful to learn some more from the other panelists on the call today. But a little bit about me, I'm a technologist by trade. I got interested maybe in the traditional startup space in the early 2013s. And I had a few rough and tumble experiences starting ventures with some founders that kind of didn't have the business acumen or social acumen to move things forward in a direction that made sense to me at the time. So I became really sensitive to like asymmetrical ownership of a few people. I developed like an allergy, I like to think of it. And I started trying to find out what the alternatives were. So I came across two organizations. One was the Democracy Collaborative. There was a professor out of Maryland, Laure Haak, who was writing a lot about, kind of a nationalistic vision around the cooperative movement, and then also the Democracy at Work Institute, Richard Wolff. And they had some like interesting ideas. And so I was like, okay, well, let me figure out what is Washington, D.C. doing around cooperatives. And I ran into a few people that invited me to a local government sponsored event around the local DC cooperative movement, sponsored by the Department of Small and Local Business Development, DSLBD, shout out to them. And they really just started connecting people in the area to worker-owned cooperatives. Fast forwarding, I came across an online pamphlet of like, how do you start as a tech freelancer? How do you start a worker cooperative? That led me to meet other people. And I ended up at this really funky conference called the Platform Cooperative Conference. And it was held in New York back when I went, maybe like 2017, 2018. And it just like blew my mind that we could just have alternative forms of ownership. So that's kind of my gateway into the DAO space. I think, with the pandemic, it's been really interesting to just like watch the types of movements people are making and the news stories that are coming out. Like people just want, in my personal opinion, want more from work and what they do. And I think like ownership is like a big part of that. And that's kind of what is really inspiring to me about co-ops and DAOs, is they're, recentering that focus onto the people at hand, the people who are doing the work or have the interest, not kind of outsourcing it to another body far away. And I think like there will be a lot more opportunities for small businesses or others in the corporate economy to kind of access the Web3 type opportunities. But knowing that there is like a kind of online offline divide, that's something that we've been really interested in bridging at Crowdwork. We have a really diverse group of people from different backgrounds, people who are who are retired, just kind of trying to find ways to promote a more healthy culture. I think most recently, the kind of getting more into the DAO side of things, I was really interested in how co-ops could not only decentralize ownership, but decentralize governance. So we started doing a lot of training with some groups in the sociocracy space. So like rule by the circle or rule by the people. And we got some really fantastic training from the groups Sociocracy for All, which is a nonprofit based in Massachusetts, and then also some other groups in the area. And I really just found out that when I was trying to approach people about DAOs, there was a lot on like technical infrastructure, but maybe not as much on social infrastructure. So like that was something where I've just run into a lot of people who are kind of interested in like, well, what are the social skills we need to kind of form a DAO? Most recently, I was invited to join like a guild of facilitators who have participated in different DAOs. And just like, one problem being like, there's not a really good understanding of facilitation as a practice. But like two, like how do you promote a culture of belonging and transparency in some of these spaces? How do you shift the mindsets and promote personal growth, not just the organizational growth? And how can you kind of use horizontal scaling, like the advantages offered through the DAO space, and not just vertical scaling? So like we've taken a social first approach and then technical second, but that may be a little bit different than most people. Essentially, we just did a lot of one-on-ones in a small group to try to get to know each other, to try to understand the ambition and the dreams, and then using that to kind of codify our principles and practices. As we do start to figure out, well, what do we want to automate? What types of technical infrastructure will be most beneficial to achieving what we're trying to do? And then also, how can we serve as a gateway or a bridge to the other folks who may not yet be in the Web3 space? They're still in Web2 or pre-Web2. But I'd be interested to hear from the other panelists, kind of how they've navigated their journey. and maybe what educational spaces they've kind of seen around, Web3. So I'll just pause there.
I'm gonna turn this over to John Pallas of Opolis to tell us a bit about his journey, as you mentioned, Brandon, but also a bit about what Opolis is. So go ahead, John.
Thank you for that. Thank you for having me. So I approach this mainly from a whole bunch of different vectors that converge into this sort of concept of what's the next generation of capitalism. So how I got there is most of it's really about game design and economic models. There's a bunch of convergences around monetary policy and social anthropology, like what are we trying to achieve kind of stuff. But in the end, my research led me to have a pretty strong conviction that whatever we come up with in the future, we've got to have a way to maintain two really primary things. One is structural and technological benevolence towards community contributors. And the second is economic self-sustainability. So when you look at different legal models, you start just looking at that simple litmus test and like, how do they match up? Like a C Corp is pretty terrible actually at managing benevolence towards, people outside of shareholders, right? So if you're looking at consumers or partners or vendors, suppliers, employees, like they get kind of the short end of the stick when the shareholders get the large end of the stick. So it kind of fails in terms of benevolence. Economic sustainability is obviously there in a C Corp, but then you can kind of just keep doing this litmus test with not-for-profits, 501c3s, foundations, whatever you want, even PBCs, like start looking at it and then make the determination, how does it work? So through about a 2-year process of research and development around new economic models, game design, incentive structures, tokenomics, which is a Web3 thing. So if you don't know what tokenomics is, it's really just economics built into a community token design. And that's short for how do you incentivize your community to do certain things that you want them to do. And the community token is typically the coordinating mechanism that assists in doing that. We're not going to get into a tokenomics discussion today, though, I don't think. But we just kept eliminating different structures, and we settled squarely on limited cooperative associations as the only legal framework that we could find that has a incentive to build profit, right? So it's a for-profit model, but it also has this self-contained notion of benevolence, right? So it's a cooperative effort to benefit the members of that said cooperative. So in kind of really looking at that compared to like what the concept of a DAO is. So if anybody doesn't know what a DAO is, it stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. Although I'll point out they're hardly decentralized in most cases, they're hardly autonomous in most cases, and they're not even technically an organization because legally they don't exist. So it's more of an acronym at this stage. And I'm a big fan of what's called progressive decentralization. So where we started was, frankly, on purpose, more centralized, but then we have a roadmap that's going to progressively decentralize the operations of our communities over time. And then eventually decision-making, governance, and distribution of profits is all something that's handled in a rather autonomous way through the community technological stack that we build. So as it relates to Opolis, and so Jackie mentioned that I was the kind of crazy guy who showed up one day and just said, hey, I want to use a co-op structure to wrap a DAO, and can we do that? And I mean, this is back years and years and years ago. I mean, this is probably 2018 when we first started really getting into the muck. And then it just sort of kept going and kept going. And, some of the ideas that I had that, I don't know, from a legal risk-taking standpoint weren't so well received. I said, let's just trot balloon it. Let's just see what happens. And let's just, not YOLO, not full on just hey, whatever, don't care. but like calculated. Like, of course, we wanted to make sure that we were doing things in a compliant way. We're dealing with employment at Opolis, but so far it's gone really well. So our framework now is being used by many different organizations of various forms. I mean, they're not using the exact structure that we're using, but our trailblazing has inspired, I would say, dozens and dozens of new organizations to come and build these next generational digital cooperatives. In fact, even Governor Polis of Colorado at ETH Denver this year in February, a large part of his speech was talking about digital communities and how Colorado aims to be the epicenter of this next revolution, such that Colorado realizes itself as the first digital state. So obviously that the definition of that is sort of ongoingly moving, but it's really been fun to be a part of it. So as it relates to Opolis, to give some context to this, because I think talking about this philosophically is a little hard for people to get their head around. It's probably easier to kind of talk about exactly the mechanics of Opolis and how we've done this. So everybody should know what a PEO is, professional employer organization. If you don't, a PEO is a legal designation that a company can take on where you are an outsourced provider of employment and benefits services for businesses. So let's say they don't want to have an HR department, or they don't have an HR department, they're a small to medium-sized business, or even a larger sized business that just doesn't want to deal with it. And they outsource the function of benefits administration, payroll, compliance, tax payments, paychecks, W-2s, 941 filing. They outsource it to another company. Now that company uses an entity to group employ a bunch of different employees from a bunch of different companies. So it's sort of an aggregation play for purchasing power. So whereas typically a small business of 2 people can't really get very good healthcare insurance, when you join a PEO, you're getting the purchasing power of hundreds, if not thousands of people. And in some cases, like TriNet, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of people that are, basically banding together to create this. Now, this is a B2B sport. So the businesses have their own interests, right? So these are corporations, love them or hate them, are the great subjugators of the workers. So this paternalistic legal relationship that we have is what it is. It's part of the game design. And employment, as it's currently designed, is actually really mostly designed around efficiency of tax collection. Whether you know that or not, the reason why the employment model exists the way that it does, and the requirements and the compliance standards exist the way that they are, is because it's easier for the taxmen to get paid than it is to collect from a bunch of independent workers. Talk to the Department of Revenue at any state, and they'll tell you that the cohort that's the most difficult to manage is their independent worker population. They hate it. And what are you going to do? Go arrest a bunch of Bob Smiths that don't pay their quarterly taxes or something? Like, no, of course not. You're not going to do that. But you can hold the officers and directors of a corporation in contempt if they don't pay their federal weekly payments. And by statute, they can do that, right? So regardless of what you think employment is about, it's not about taking care of the employees. It's not about any of that. It's about taxes. So thinking forward to the next generation of employment, and one of the core concepts of Web3 is disintermediation of trusted third parties. So what is more centralized third party than employment? In other words, as an employee, I've got to ask permission from some corporation to get access to something as simple as group healthcare insurance, or a 401k plan, or unemployment insurance, or workman's comp insurance, or any of that. Like, I can't get any of that on my own. If I decide to be independent, that comes at a cost. It comes at a big disadvantage to me. Not to mention the complexity of administering a small business, or making heads or tails of how to maximize tax implications. I mean, forget about it. Most people are not experts in this stuff. So what we said was, wouldn't it be cool if we could create a cooperative DAO, or a digital employment cooperative, or an employment DAO, to create a platform, talk about platform co-ops, that enables workers to collectively band together to essentially employ themselves, but provide all the standard accoutrement of what you would see in a large organization like group healthcare, like great benefits, national coverage, sophisticated tool sets, compliance, planning, tax payments, like all that, automate all of it. So essentially build a PEO for independent workers. So instead of going B2B, we just eliminate the middleman, we go straight to B2C. Now, from a compliance standpoint, corporations like this too, because typically you've got worker classification issues, you've got all these other things you got to think about, but these people are getting W-2s, they're getting pay stubs, they're being paid. It's just like a staffing company. How many staffing companies do you worry about having worker classification issues with? You don't, because they take on the risk. This is no different. They're taking on the risk as their staffing company of one, but they're plugged into a platform that enables thousands of people to be operating this way. So they get the benefits of having all of the typical features of large corporate employment without giving up their independence. Now, in a DAO format, people are often contributing to multiple platforms at the same time. People have multiple revenue streams. They have all sorts of various things going on, not just gig workers. I mean, we're seeing this, and not just professional consultants. We're seeing accountants and designers and software developers working on various projects. Well, who should the employer be? Which one? Which one should take on the responsibility? All of them? That seems like overkill. So they all have to do ACA compliance. They all have to offer healthcare, or none of them do because they're part-time, right? So they all get off the hook. So then the employee gets screwed because they're not qualified to get the full benefits package. Well, this way, it's actually reversed. Their employment is portable to them. They don't have to worry about what is going on at these corporations, because if they decide to end one contract and pick up another one or various other ones, their employment, their healthcare, everything moves with them. Now, when you talk about the abstract of the Web3 digital future and what the future of work is and how it fits into that, I see Web3 as synonymous with the future of work. A highly fluid, high frequency, low friction, permissionless, global work environment where you can opt in to contribute to projects that are of interest to you based on your values and your skills and your lifestyle. Having access to those kinds of things would never work if you have to still operate inside of the corporate central employment model, because that's not high fluidity, that's not high frequency, that's super high friction. So you've got to basically take the risk off the plates of these corporations, because that's what they're managing for. Risk equals cost. So they have to put in compliance standards and control mechanisms and HR protocols and all these things to manage their, quote, human capital. Could we be less personal? And they move into this place where we've actually can flip it on its head. So from a legal, social design, economics design, we've taken, and just to kind of collapse the loop on this, we've taken a holistic view of architecting and engineering an entire new ecosystem platform that is high frequency, community owned, incredibly flexible, and we're already starting to scale it internationally. So very fun stuff.
Thanks, John. So it's Opolis. And if you want to throw a link in the chat, that would be awesome. I'm going to turn this over to Shady. We are running. I didn't stop anyone because everyone's presentation was so awesome. So Shady, I'm just going to give you the rest of the time. If a question comes up, I'll pop in, but please just use the time.
Cool. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. It's been really, really cool to kind of see multiple angles thinking about what does work look like in digital spaces. And, we've heard a little bit about, let me see here, one sec. We've heard a little bit about worker collectives across all sorts of domains. We've heard about Web3 and how it kind of charts forward the future of work for software developers, designers, consultants, accountants. And, I'm kind of coming at this, I think, from a very specific niche community of scientists, which are workers, whether they realize it or not. They tend to think that they're kind of just privileged and sheltered within the institutional safe house, being able to play as they wish. And I think that there are, I would say that science and science workers are one of the few kind of areas of work that are just waiting to be disrupted. And there's tons of reasons for this, stemming from kind of institutional inefficiencies or how we think about work in scientific practice, whether it's peer review, whether it's how grants are allocated, or whether it's about climbing the academic ladder. So a little bit background about me before I kind of dive into a little bit about OpSci. I'm a neuroscientist by training and still do research. I'm also a founder of a community of scientists, developers, and advocates for open science practice that's been forming into a DAO. So I wouldn't say we're quite that mythical creature of a completely decentralized, autonomous organization where we have a fully fleshed out legal wrapper and all of our operations run on smart contracts, and our CEOs are just chain link keepers or autonomous agents that are executing smart contracts, right? So this kind of came together again during the COVID pandemic, which I think really was a hallmark moment for the next evolution of DAO governance. I think it was definitely the season of DAOs midway through the pandemic. I think a key part of that really had to do with people shifting from physical in-person sort of work to having to become web natives kind of at the drop of a dime. And I think that's, you know, amongst many of the other industries that were disrupted, science was particularly so, because we really relied on our equipment, our facilities, the institution gates access to a lot of the resources that we require, and they just weren't ready to kind of transition to a completely digital workflow. So COVID kind of gave scientists a hint at what a purely web-like experience could look like. And something that's quite fascinating about being digitally native is that you become more aware of your presence, your persona, your identity, your data, and your role in it all, and specifically who owns what and who gets to control or gate access to what. So OpSci came together basically as a bunch of folks we're at a hackathon. We're trying to solve issues with peer-to-peer sharing, trying to get around third-party infrastructure providers that might or might not comply with regulations in different jurisdictions. And we ended up really diving deep into the DAO rabbit hole after getting some funding from the Ocean DAO to basically scale up our solutions and put together a decentralized data commons using technology like IPFS, Filecoin, Ethereum smart contracts, and Ocean Protocol smart contracts. So, you know, I kind of alluded to this, that science is ripe for disruption. And that's because science is really at the front lines of the progress of society and technology today, right? So scientists are the ones that are sifting through all of the knowledge, all of the data that's been collected, and trying to make sense of it to continue this crazy experiment that we have as human civilization, right? How much longer can we continue this pace of innovation that's kind of gone on overdrive since the Industrial Revolution? And a lot of that has to do with better coordination mechanisms. Can we actually communicate, work with each other, and automate away some of this overwhelming avalanche of kind of data curation, custodianship, and analytics and insight generation? So, you know, a big kind of issue right now in science is that a lot of data isn't collected, or a lot of data that's collected isn't published alongside papers. There's a huge replication crisis right now. So it begs the question, really, what is progress, or what is what is knowledge at this point? And there's a great example of the protein structure that I showed on the last slide, alpha beta, amyloid beta 56, which has been implicated in basically the amyloid beta hypothesis of Alzheimer's disease. And it turned out that all this work that's been federally funded for millions and millions of dollars turned out to kind of not be that true, and some of the results were falsified. So if we can't depend on the literature that's out there, and scientists are generating reputation based on falsified or maybe not true data, and they don't even know it, you know, how do we actually move forward? And so a lot of that has to do with scientists not talking to each other. You can think of scientists as kind of siloed within their laboratories or within their spaces, and they're trying to solve their problems. And we have an entire infrastructure of publishers and an entire economy of curators and analytics companies that perform the task of the socially anxious or perform the missing tasks of the socially anxious scientists and be able to kind of plug scientists together as a third party. So, we asked the question, what does the scientific society that's web native, parametrically configured around open science impact look like? And by configured, I mean actual measurable parameters and dials and toggles that you can twist and turn on or off to facilitate certain types of discourse or certain types of rigorous appraisal of research and so on and so forth. And so what we did was we put together basically just a Discord, and we automated a bunch of flows within the Discord so that individuals were routed into different roles or different self-elected maybe tasks. And we collected data as well as we did that. And if you take a look at kind of who flooded into the Open Science DAO when we started, I think in just about end of February 2021, we had about 40% of the folks coming in were researchers of some sort, either at an institution or identified as an independent researcher. Others were hackers that had heard of it during a hackathon and thought this, problems were kind of cool and wanted to continue working on it. And then we had some DAO operators kind of flooding in as well, just as many as kind of some of these developers. Others self-identified as kind of curators, individuals that are looking for knowledge or looking to put information together, collate newspapers, that sort of stuff. And we had a couple of other different roles. So, predominantly OpSci came together as a community of researchers and engineers with kind of a smatter of different types of, I guess, you could consider like undergraduates or graduate students that might be considered scholars or, business people that are involved in operations or entrepreneurship, what have you. And so we asked the question within this population of researchers, what do you want? What is it that you actually need? Why are you here in this digital space looking for either answers or looking for solutions? And it turned out that the biggest issue was, of course, funding for basic science. And crypto seemed to be booming at the time during COVID and providing tons of opportunities like through Vita DAO, for example, for scientific research. I think another key issue that we recognized early on, and this was tied right up there with low hassle funding, is both recognition and compensation. And not just financial compensation, but compensation in terms of resources, in terms of reputation and so on for contributions to scientific knowledge. And, coming close in a close third and fourth were global community collaboration connection, right? So scientists typically are isolated, but maybe they don't want to be. And a key to that is being able to work together on data sets, pool those data sets together, and track kind of contributions over time. So we took all of this over the past year and we built little bits and pieces and iterative experiments thinking about how could we address some of these issues. And over the past 3 months, we've been putting together this concept of an open science society that puts these different technologies we've built together that links off-chain impact, right? Or it could be on-chain impact as well, with an open science practice, with things like, for example, proof of scholarship, right? So you put together a research proposal, it's been rigorously vetted, and it passed some DAO governance or community governance, and it's a good proposal, right? So that's a proof of scholarship that you have a meaningful pursuit of research or pursuit of knowledge or pursuit of a question you want to answer. And how about also maybe proof of mentorship, right? That's something that's incredibly undervalued, I think, or maybe just overlooked in just academics and scientific research overall. The knowledge isn't in the papers. The knowledge is going to be in the individuals that are custodying and bringing up different trainees. And they're often those that are gating access to the hallowed lands, right? Whether it's a tenure track position or whether it's a fellowship or whatever, what have you. And, most importantly, kind of coming back to some of these issues with being able to actually prove that knowledge is knowledge and it's not just fabricated or made up or incorrectly, maybe through errors incorrectly done, but proof of replication, right? So we built 3 applications for this. Verse, which is an on-chain protocol for linking off-chain academic credentials on-chain and being able to allowing users to be able to choose how they want to represent themselves, their scientific persona online, either pseudonymously or anonymously. And this is built on zero knowledge proofs. So there's a lot of flexibility there in how we can actually represent privacy and ownership in Web3 systems. Versus kind of the key for tracking how different identities within the ecosystem of OpSci are collaborating and coordinating. So we have Commons, which is a data publishing platform, and Fellowship, which is basically at this point a GitHub repository that anyone can pull a request and submit a proposal, get discussed by the community, and upon a successful vote within a fellowship season, they'll receive funding for that. So yeah, so I spoke a little bit. I'm going to speed through this real quick. So we spoke a little bit about Verse and how it kind of works. Talked a little bit about some of these academic profiles. We talked about community and connection through fellowship and training and mentorship and being able to prove those things. A key kind of component to all of this is coming back to that number one need that scientists requested, which is getting low hassle funding. So when you're able to use something like a blockchain or some sort of smart contract platform that gives you kind of an interoperable reference point, right, of data and metadata that's associated with perhaps impact, right? So someone actually verifies their identity, they link their ORCID, their academic credentials, perhaps other accounts, and as they're going through, their history is kind of being compiled over time. So we're implementing this concept of impact certificates, which came out of the Gitcoin DAO, I think just earlier this year, around May or June, and is now kind of being custodied by Protocol Labs under the Hyper Certificate project. And so they're putting together a specification that we're closely watching and implementing into this design, into this architecture design, where when you do produce those proofs of impact, right, you get minted an impact certificate. So you propose a successful proposal. Your fellowship proposal is now notarized as an impact or stamped as an impact certificate that's linked to your academic credentials, both off and on chain within decentralized science ecosystems. And individuals in other impact markets that are run by other folks, like whether it's Protocol Labs or Gitcoin or what have you, can see these impact certificates and filter through different metrics, whether it's based off of citation count or review score or whatever, and be able to fund the individual directly, right? That fellowship proposal directly. So the last bit is the Web3 Data Commons, which I shared a little bit about, but the idea is how DAOs really kind of give us new tools for data governance and how we can incentivize open science practice by basically providing the same sort of mechanism with impact certificates. If you take the time to clean your data, put it in a specific format so that it's machine readable and can be validated by a smart contract as like BID standard or Neurodata Without Borders standard that makes it amenable for open science practices, then you get minted an impact certificate. Your project can then become retroactively funded for the work that you've done there. And that's something that's really unique to Web3 and specifically DAO structures, because a DAO or society can come together and decide which metrics they really want to best represent themselves as a community. And because they are an expert society that would be reviewing these anyway, they are in the best position to do that. There's also some interesting, I think, knock-on effects too, with thinking about governance going beyond just token-based governance or where tokens are liquid or transferable, meaning that there's some sort of financial stake, moving more towards impact-based governance or reputation-based governance. And so that's something maybe we can chat a little bit about in the time that we have left. But just to wrap things up, what we've done here with OpSci Society is showed how you can take verified academic credentials, bootstrap a web native digital community of science practitioners, and we've shown some examples of how things like proof of fellowship, proof of mentorship, proof of reproducibility can be used to siphon or direct pro and retroactive funding for work already done or good work that could be done, and where everything is really creator owned and the parameters that govern all of this are produced by the community.
I want to thank everyone for joining us. I did want to just for a moment share my screen really quickly and just remind folks that this was a part of an ownership design series where we touched on a number of different ways of thinking about setting up your business. I know today for many people on the call, they're like, DAO, but what I really love about this call is it brought in a legal expert who's talked about how do we actually set up the legal components that enable folks who are thinking about this kind of structure to create an entity that can basically make transactions in space in their business space, right? So this is super important to be able to have that liability shield that other kind of more common business structures make available, like an LLC or even employee ownership, right? And then to have John and Brandon talk a bit about how do we think about setting up a structure that enables this kind of horizontal growth rather than just the vertical growth of an organization. Brandon talking about it kind of from a sociocracy perspective, and John actually putting in place an actual business, a DAO-based LCA business that says, okay, we're all working. How do we actually get paid appropriately and maintain that kind of horizontal structure through what he's doing at Opolis. And then Shady kind of taking this a step further, which is so fun for me also as a scientist to say, hey, we're actually looking at other kinds of reputational / employment structures, academia, and saying, hey, can we actually change the way that works as well and provide DAO-based technical and to some degree social infrastructures that makes it possible for everyone who contributes to receive credit for the work that they're doing. So there's really some wonderful nuggets in here. I hope folks come back, listen to the recordings again, and get a sense of, what the options are maybe for your business or for those folks that you are counseling as part of a SCORE Mentors program or other small business programs. So I want to thank Jacqueline Radebaugh, John Paller, Shady Damaty, and Brandon Dubé for their time today. I want to thank all the attendees for their participation and wish you all a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks again.